Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and masked killers on ocean liners. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at a British psychological horror film called Triangle. Triangle follows a woman named Jess who joins her friend Greg and some others on a sailing trip. A freaky storm trashes their boat and has them hop aboard a strangely empty ocean liner, where bad things begin to happen. That's all I'm going to say right now, and I want to give you a warning up front. This is the sort of movie that you should watch without spoilers, and Triangle is currently free to watch on Peacock, Vudu, and Tubi, so go check it out. Okay, you've been warned. Triangle was written and directed by Christopher Smith, who has brought us films like Creep, Severance, and Black Death. He wanted to create a film utilizing deja vu similar to Memento or Jacob's Ladder while still building its own unique setting. Smith was awarded nearly $3 million to help fund the project from the UK Film Council, which is something I'm really glad exists. Music was composed by Christian Henson, who has worked on a ton of films, and cinematography was done by Robert Humphries from The Hunter and Fear the Walking Dead. Triangle makes use of a pretty small cast, including Melissa George from the Amityville Horror and 30 Days of Night, Michael Dorman from The Invisible Man and For All Mankind, Rachel Carpani from McLeod's Daughters and The Way Back, Henry Nixon from The Kettering Incident and The Pacific, and a young-ass Liam Hemsworth in his second film role ever. With a total budget of around $12 million, Triangle was theatrically released in the UK and a few other countries, but was only released on DVD and Blu-ray in the US. It only made $1.5 million at the box office, making it a huge financial failure, but it was more appreciated by critics who enjoyed its twisting story, cinematography, solid acting, and shocking moments of violence. It currently has an 80 and 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it seems critics enjoyed Triangle a bit more than general audiences, but generally it's gotten positive feedback. I want to thank my patron, the 4 Mood Groups, for requesting Triangle for me to review. I watched it without doing any research, and I was intrigued and invested the whole time. I'm excited to watch it a second time now that I know what to look for. I hope y'all don't mind dead seagulls, cause we're watching Triangle. The movie begins between the opening credits as we get glimpses of crying Jess comforting her autistic son Tommy, the neighbor cutting grass, a sprinkler, Jess doing laundry, picking up after Tommy, and cleaning up after Tommy. Her doorbell rings but nobody is there, and she packs up a big duffel bag and loads it and an upset Tommy into the car. Now we meet Greg as he prepares the Triangle to set sail, and his longtime friend Downey and his wife Sally, as well as Sally's friend Heather, hop aboard. He also greets Jess and his first mate Victor, who indicates something seems weird. Jess seems dazed but says she's just tired, but she still wants to join him on the boat today. Greg introduces her to everyone and they head out onto the Great Blue Sea. Jess is taking a snooze when she dreams of washing ashore on a crabby beach, but wakes up not remembering what happened in that dream. Greg asks Victor what he meant earlier, and he explains that he asked Jess where her son was and she couldn't remember. She eventually said he was in school, but today is Saturday. Greg explains that her son has special needs and goes to school 7 days a week, and asks him to be nice to her. Sally is trying to hook Greg up with Heather, and she really doesn't like Jess for some reason. Victor releases the sail, and Greg explains to Jess that Victor is a runaway. He found him sleeping in the harbor and let the young man move into his boat with him. He is also annoyed as every year Sally tries to set him up with a friend of hers, and he may or may not be interested in Jess. She tells Greg about how particular Tommy is and how she feels guilty whenever she isn't with him. All of a sudden, the winds severely die down, and Downey spots an ominous storm heading their way. Greg radios into the Coast Guard, who hasn't picked up any weird weather. The signal shifts to a woman calling for help, saying everyone has been killed. Uh-oh. The signal from the woman and the Coast Guard cut out, and Greg commands everyone to go below deck as some big-ass waves approach. He and Victor struggle to cut the sails loose as the hull fills up with water, but a big wave capsizes the boat and Heather is sucked through a window. Everyone makes it out relatively okay except for Heather, who is nowhere to be seen. Greg tries to comfort Jess as the shipwreck floats along, and she and Victor notice an ocean liner heading their direction. They wave the ship down and spot a mysterious person, and Jess is hesitant to hop aboard. She finds all of this oddly familiar, and they head toward the bridge to find the ship's captain. They explore the empty, maze-like ship, but can't find anybody on board. Jess tells Greg she recognizes this place, but he assures her she's never been here. They learn they are on a ship from the 1930s called the Aeolus, which is named after the Greek god of the wind. His son Sisyphus managed to cheat death and was punished by the gods, forced to roll a huge boulder up a mountain, only for it to roll back down as he reached the top for all of eternity. They hear a noise and find some keys around a corner, which Jess realizes are hers. Sally thinks that Heather must be on board, but Downey finds that very unlikely. They enter the dining hall, which has a big feast ready for the group. Greg's watch says it's 11:30, but Jess's watch matches the time on the ship, which is stuck at 8:17. Greg wants to continue looking for the captain, and Jess spots someone watching them from around a corner. Victor goes running after the figure, and Greg leaves Downey and Sally to wait for him while he and Jess look for the captain. She keeps telling Greg she's having deja vu, but Greg tells her it's all in her mind. They hear a noise in room 237 because of course, where they find a steamy bathroom and a message written in blood. Victor continues his search and follows some noises up to the deck, and Greg theorizes that the ship's crew was bored and they are fucking with them for fun. Jess argues that something is seriously wrong here, and when Greg questions her mental state, she says her only goal is to get back to Tommy. Greg heads to the theater by himself, but Downey and Sally are also heading to the theater to meet him when they find a trail of blood. They end up at the theater anyway, and Jess returns to the dining room to find the banquet is rotten. She hides when she hears a noise, and Victor stumbles out covered in blood. He starts strangling Jess, but she digs into a hole he has on the back of his head, maybe killing him, and Jess hears a gunshot. She runs to the theater where Downey and Sally are cradling dead Greg, who told them Jess shot him before dying. She tries to prove her innocence and says Victor was also attacked, but Downey asks why she told them to come to the theater, which Jess says she didn't do. They think Jess has lost it, but Sally is suddenly shot in the shoulder from a balcony. A masked figure shoots Downey twice to kill him, and Sally once again to kill her as Jess tries to drag her away. Jess runs downstairs into the crew kitchen where she grabs a big ol' knife. She hides as the shotgun-wielding killer searches for her, and she's able to sneak back up to the deck. She hears running on the floor above her, but gets thwomped by the butt of the shotgun. She begs the hesitant killer not to shoot her and manages to evade 2 shots and roll to the lower deck. The killer barely misses a couple more shots and manages to hit her with the shotgun itself. Jess keeps going and grabs a fire axe, and she gets into an all-out melee battle with the killer. She ends up getting the upper hand and corners the attacker, who surprisingly has a woman's voice. Jess can't make out most of what she says, but she does say the only way to go home is to kill them all, and she yeets herself overboard. Jess follows the sound of a record player stuck on loop and starts it over, and she goes back outside to see the Triangle crew, including herself, waving the ship down. Turns out Jess was that mysterious figure they saw on board, and she backs into the record player, causing her to skip along with it. She watches the crew as they hop aboard and search the ship just like they did the first time. She has a bit of a breakdown and drops her keys, explaining who dropped them the first time. She finds the blood message and relocates the group in the dining room, which is when new Jess spots her. She runs out to the deck where she spots Downey's body being pecked at by gulls, as well as a bloodstain. This is when Victor reaches the deck, and Jess very poorly tries to explain what is going on. Victor is obviously not following, and when she tries to show him Downey's body, it is gone. She tells him he's going to die with a hole in his head, and when he refuses to listen to her nonsense, she accidentally pushes his head into a wall hanger. Ugh. Then she fucking runs away, and Victor recreates the bloodstain she spotted earlier. She finds herself and Greg right before their argument, and she has another breakdown in a locker room. She hears herself asking "Who are you?" and finds a bunch of notes saying, "If they board, kill them all." She writes it down to confirm that it is her handwriting, and she finds a bunch of the outfits the masked killer was wearing. She recollects what the killer said to her and realizes that it was another version of herself, but refuses to kill the others this time around. She notices a grate filled with a bunch of her Tommy lockets, which her current one falls into as well. She grabs a bunch of shotgun shells and finds Bloody Victor just as new Jess returns to the dining room. She confronts both of them to prevent them from killing each other, but then she just lets the other Jess run away. She's all happy that she changed the timeline, but I don't think woozy ass Victor will be much help in explaining to the others. Speaking of, Greg still gets shot by masked Jess. She is able to save Downey and Sally from being shot though, and even nicks the top of Bagface. She once again fails to even remotely explain to Sally and Downey what's happening and leaves them to go get Victor. Well, he either crawled away or got dragged away and thrown overboard, so good job, Jess. Downey shoots at someone, and we confirm our suspicions that Jess was the killer. Killer Jess somehow convinces them to follow her and to ignore as our Jess calls out to them. She lures them into room 237 and stabs the shit out of both of them, but Sally manages to crawl away while she finishes off Downey. Our Jess chases after Sally through the lower floor, but she manages to slip away and find a radio. So it turns out Sally was the one who radioed into Greg before the storm, and Jess follows Sally to a previously unseen area of the ship. Oh shit, it's a mass grave of Sally's, reiterating just how many times this cycle has already happened. Jess once again fails to elaborate beyond "it wasn't me," and she watches as the newest Jess actually kills Baghead Jess. She tells Sally they can escape on the next triangle that arrives, but terrified Sally succumbs to her wounds and dies amongst the others. Our Jess watches as new Jess watches the newest Jess arrive, and she realizes that a new ship arrives every time the rest of the crew dies. They hop aboard and Jess realizes the triangle is floating away quickly and she tries to stop the Aeolus. Girl, just grab that life ring and swim over. She obviously fails and has another breakdown, and now she watches second newest Jess accidentally impale Victor. She tells Victor she can save him, and she heads to room 237 to clean up Downey's body. She writes the message on the mirror and disposes of Downey and Greg. She tells Downey and Sally to go to the theater just like they said she did the first time, and she dons the coveralls and sackhead to go hunting. She watches new Jess and Greg argue, and once he's alone overlooking the theater, she sneaks up behind him. Greg tries to calm the shooter down until he recognizes Jess by her shoes. She starts talking absolute nonsense once again and shoots Greg, sending him down into the theater. He whispers that Jess did it before quickly dying, just in time for the newest Jess to enter. She loads up the gun and starts shooting, killing Downey and Sally like earlier, and the chase after the new Jess plays out just like the first time. She whacks new Jess with the gun but hesitates to shoot her and gets overpowered. She gives new Jess the same warning she was given and yeets herself overboard. Jess maybe somehow survives and wakes up on that crabby shore she was dreaming about, and she finds a road to hitch a ride from. She eventually makes it home, bringing us back to where the movie began. She watches Tommy paint as newest Jess grabs the laundry and Tommy's toy boat. Now we learn the dark truth about the opening as Jess screams and curses at Tommy. Tommy spots Jess watching from outside, which is what causes him to spill his paint water, and she slaps the shit out of him and screams some more. Realizing she is an absolute piece of shit, she sneaks back to the front and rings the doorbell. She goes around back and grabs a big ass mallet, and when mean mom Jess comes back inside, she kills her with it. Tommy watches that shit and Jess tries to comfort him, giving a whole new look to the opening. She stuffs dead Jess into the duffel bag, puts on the new locket, and loads her into the trunk. I'm not sure where she's intending on taking Tommy right now, but she promises she will never lose her temper or hurt him again. Then she hits a seagull and pulls over, and upon Tommy's request, she pretends to bury it. She tosses it over a levee where she realizes everything is still going according to plan. She runs back to the car and takes off, and as Tommy freaks out because of the blood, she swerves into the other lane and is nailed by a semi. Kids from a nearby marching band swarm the scene where mean mom Jess and dead Tommy are laid out on the pavement. Our Jess somehow made it out unscathed, and she is greeted by a taxi driver. She asks, "Who are you?" to which he says he is just a driver. He says there is no hope for the boy, and Jess asks him to take her to the harbor. She falls asleep on the ride over, and the driver says he will wait for her. She promises to return, and this is where she meets Victor, who she no longer remembers. This is also why she seems confused about Tommy's current location, and why she's generally so delirious at the start of the film. The movie ends as Jess hops aboard and meets everyone, and the brutal cycle starts over again. And that's Triangle. I got a lot to cover here. Aside from its complicated plot, it also has a ton of references and symbolism. I'll start with a quick breakdown of the time loop itself, as it isn't until the end we really understand it. The cycle more or less resets when Jess falls asleep in the taxi and on the boat, as this is when she pretty much forgets the events she previously went through. She recalls a bit in deja vu fashion, but not enough to help her. I'm not sure if it restarts in the taxi or when she sleeps on the boat. It's a little murky about which it is, but I'll get into that in a sec. I'm going to call the Jess that we follow during the movie, as well as her original crew, Group 3, as they are the third group on board when they board. So when Jess 3 and her crew arrives, there is already Jess 1 and 2 on board. Jess 2 is the mysterious person they see watching them, and Jess 1 is the masked one trying to kill them all. Jess 3 overpowers Jess 1 and sends her overboard, and this is when Jess 4 arrives, and Jess 3 takes over the role that Jess 2 was doing. Jess 3 runs around confused, accidentally fulfilling all the roles she was meant to, including injuring Victor number 4. She grabs the gun and intercepts Jess 4 and Victor 4, hoping to alter the loop and save everyone, but this is when we start to realize that these multiple loops are actually one connected loop. Jess 2 has now donned the mask and tries to kill Downey 4 and Sally 4, and while Jess 3 momentarily saves them, they are killed a bit later. Sally 4's radio message is heard by an incoming Greg 5, and this is the group Jess 3 masks up against and tries to kill, only to be overpowered and jump overboard. This cycle repeats endlessly, with the odd-numbered Jesses killing their loop's Victor, letting the previous odd-numbered Jess, who is still masked, jump overboard, and eventually jumping off themselves. The even Jesses are the ones who get intercepted by the previous Jess in the dining room, get a head wound, and finally get unmasked and beaten to death by the newest Jess. The odd-numbered Jesses eventually go home and kill Mean Mom Jesses, so I'm not sure if Tommy actually dies in every loop, as there is no Jess to kill the Mean Mom version when it's the even ones. So during the even rounds, I'm not sure if Mean Mom Jess gets into that accident and hops aboard, but that's all speculation as we don't see that in the movie. So what is the point of this time loop though? What does it all mean? Jess's loop is very similar to Sisyphus, who is forced to roll a boulder for eternity after cheating death. A common theory is that Jess as we know her is already dead and has been dead the whole movie, and she's either in purgatory or refusing to cross over. When Jess was alive, she was fucking mean as hell to Tommy and got into that accident on her own and died on scene. The Jess we see at the end talking to the taxi driver is her soul, or whatever you'd like to call it. Going back to Sisyphus, the taxi driver is an analogy for death, who Jess promises she will return to, only to go on a sailing trip instead. I think she decides to go sailing in an attempt to redo everything and save Tommy, and all of the trauma of what has happened is why she is so weird in the beginning. But once she has hopped on the boat and cheated death, her memory is wiped, dooming her to repeat this process again and again. Jess refuses to accept that her son is dead, she was awful to him, and there's nothing she can do to change that. The moral of Sisyphus's story is we can't change the past or run from our problems, we can only face them head on and accept the losses along the way. Jess refuses to accept that she is human garbage and will suffer for eternity for it, all while believing she has the power to change it. I haven't even mentioned that the movie probably takes place in the Bermuda Triangle, which adds some of the how and why all of these supernatural things are happening in the first place. It can be assumed that the Aeolus was a ship that went missing in the triangle, and now it is used to teach awful life lessons. The song on the record player was actually recorded by a musician who went missing in the Bermuda Triangle, so that's creepy. There are also a bunch of nods to The Shining with Room 237, Bloody Mirror messages, and the good old fire axe. I think the story is really well crafted and it utilizes the time looping and mythological elements in smart ways. It's definitely a movie that will never be the same after the first time you watch it, but that's okay as you can re-watch it and look for all of the things you missed the first time. I think the sound design, editing, and cinematography are all fantastic, and the acting is pretty solid too. I don't know if I was supposed to, but I really hated Jess from the beginning. She was just so terrible at communicating with the others, it was just infuriating. All in all, Triangle is an example of time loop horror done really well. I will say it's not a really scary movie, but I don't think I've seen a time loop horror that is. Triangle's strength lies in having us slowly unravel the mystery, not in cheap jump scares. If you enjoy movies like Dark City, The Endless, or Happy Death Day, you'll probably love Triangle too. Thank you again to my patron, the 4 Mood Groups, for recommending it. I had a great time with it. And remember, you too can request movies for me to review by becoming a patron or emailing me at hamburgersandhorror@gmail.com. Well, that's about it. Next week we'll be checking out a classic Christmas horror with Silent Night, Deadly Night. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Triangle. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.